Here, can we call the meeting to order? Need a resolution to approve the minutes of the last meeting. Moved by Fred, seconded by Ron. Any changes? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, there's no referrals. We're strictly on discussion items all the way down to number 5. And this to continue the discussion regarding the preparation of the performance evaluation form for the county administrator. You all had the packet that included Rachel's recommended form, recommended by Rachel, that is, as well as the supervisor individual evaluation forms. So I guess with that, and there is a letter, or a note we just got, a memo from Gretchen at HR, and I think that we should address that also while we're talking about these forms, but essentially HR has a concern about the 5 elements that we're attempting to measure. So with that, Rachel.
Mr. Chairman, could we have a moment to review this? I think, as we've previously stated, it would be nice to have this information ahead of time, not as soon as we sit down at a meeting to review it.
Well, unfortunately, Gretchen wasn't involved in the process, nor was I. This was sent out on Friday, I believe, in preparation for the committee meeting. That was the first notice I had gotten of any of your work product, Supervisor Sieber. And so upon receipt of it Friday, as soon as my time permitted, I got a copy of this to Gretchen so she could see it, because I did think it is important to have your HR director involved in this process.
Oh, I'm a little confused here. I provided this document well over a week and a half ago to our chairman, actually before our last county board meeting, because I made a report on it. And, you know, I was asked to provide it to our chairman and to Bud for review before disseminating it. And it was determined that Bud would take care of that piece of it. So I don't know what you're talking about, but it's the first time you've been involved. We were all here at our meeting, the last committee meeting. The elements stayed the same. They weren't any different. And just to clarify, it is not my form, or as a committee, we came up with those elements. It was not done solely by me and agreed upon those at the last meeting. Then it became, what type of a form do we put them in? I was asked to work on that and send it to the chairman, which I did. So
that's correct, but this is your form, Supervisor Sieber, and as I mentioned, the first that I saw of it, or the first that the HR director saw of it, was on Friday, which is the explanation to your point of why you're getting this information today.
I would add, I did send out the forms to the individual committee members, and I did not send them to Paul or to Gretchen. So that's my error, if anything else, okay? But you want time to review this. It's a 1-page memo. I don't think there's a whole lot you want Gretchen to address it?
I'd just like to read it initially.
Okay, take your time and read it.
But if I could just make one correction, in the form, there was a checkbox for self-evaluation, so there was mention of self-evaluation. And we weren't tasked with developing a form for self-evaluation, so I didn't do that. That wasn't requested by the committee, so there is an area on the performance plan that had a self-evaluation checkbox, recognizing that, of course, that's important. And it brings up another issue. Martin Afferty was going to come up for today. He said to give him a call if we had any questions. But I think there was some confusion from our last committee meeting about self-evaluation as it relates to Section 8 of our ethics law, and just trying to be, I had a complaint from, or some feedback from a Queensberry citizen who had wanted to clarify the fact that the county administrator, based on our ethics law, couldn't have anything to do with their own performance rating to be on that committee or influence the committee on what they're rated on. And Martin had a great explanation for that, and so I don't know if it's worth having him come up and kind of clarify that, or if you wanted to do it at a later
Committee,
date.
you want to bring Martin up? Thanks. While we're waiting for Martin, I'm looking at Gretchen's memo here, and there's a portion of it that it's strange because I agree with it 100%. I had written up a procedure for completing performance reviews by the county administrator, so I'll pass that out now.
I'll get some copies. Here, bud.
I didn't know we had it. They won't put me on that, I'm really sure of it. Do we have an executive committee established?
Thank you.
I don't even think we have one established.
Yeah, that was the question I was about to ask.
You're one of the crowd.
Maybe that was.
Put ourselves in for like.
For me. On? You sure? Anybody else need it? No?
This is what?
That's fine.
You got it. No? You guys all happy?
Probably not on a personal.
Or maybe doesn't.
I don't think so. Slow the process down.
we just had a question while we're waiting for Martin. Do we
Sure.
actually have an executive committee? None of us knew.
I guess I'll let Kevin address that.
As such, not really, but what I would presume the executive committee would be the, chairman, finance, budget, and personnel. I guess, Paul, am I correct that when we have most of the decisions, those are the key?
Well, when you say decisions, I think that really it refers to discussions of major issues. Certainly we'll bring in that team because they're usually the ones that are most affected and would get the word out to the other supervisors. But, of course, any information that ultimately would come before committees and get properly disseminated in that fashion. But you're correct, Mr. Chairman, that's the group that most frequently I would have contact with, and that comes together to consider various issues that are of import.
All right, the man has just walked into the room.
Boy. Morning.
We've had some concerns about a contact that there may be an ethics violation, and with regard to self-evaluation of the administrator, and I wonder if you could address that.
Okay. The answer is I can address that, and if I understand it, it goes under the recusal and abstention matter.
It was just that matter I talked
talked
about
about-
Friday.
okay.
Yeah, I don't think
Okay.
he was saying there was a violation. I think it was just an area of concern based on the last
Right.
committee meeting.
Here's how I view that, and to the extent that the county administrator would have an involvement or be in considering, standards or criteria or objectives for performance evaluation, I don't view this ethics provision in our code as addressing that at all. I view this provision as saying if he's deliberating on it with the intention of voting on it, he doesn't have a vote on this. And it would seem to me that as you are moving forward here to try to get the best evaluative criteria, whether it be for the county administrator or whether it be for the county attorney or any other department head, it would seem to me that you would at some point value their input and consideration. I mean, ultimately, it seems to me it's your say as to what that objective criteria is. But I don't necessarily see this as applying in this instance. Here's what I see this applying to. If there was a matter that came before the board, and there was we were voting on a contract or a policy or something that could directly lead to someone's financial interest, then I think that's where this provision applies. But I don't think that assisting a committee with developing criteria for an objective evaluation applies in this instance of what you're going through. So let's say, for example, there was I have a business, or you have a business, and I might have some relationship, some financial interest in that business. I might be a passive investor in that business, as the case may be. And if I'm involved in creating criteria, creating policy, or deliberating in a fashion where that business I'm engineering that business to try to become involved in getting a county contract, I think that's what this provision applies for. That's a no-no. But I don't think it applies here in this particular instance with what I understand this committee is being asked to do and is trying to accomplish.
And I think it's not unusual to have self-evaluation be part of the review process. We have goals for each person to meet, and simply what's happening is that they're reading their goals and they're saying, this is how I think I performed to them. And I think it's a good tool to use in the review. It doesn't affect the review at all, but.
I guess and again, I've been involved at a very, very minor level with this process. But looking at it from my perspective as county attorney, I would hope that when this committee or any other committee comes around to establishing criteria for my evaluation, the county attorney's evaluation, or the DSS commissioner's evaluation, or any other department head's evaluation, that you would consider input from that department head, because I don't think there's anyone better than that department head to be able to determine what that at least what they do on a day-to-day basis. Having said that, I do think, as in all instances, it's ultimately the supervisors who determine what that criteria should be.
And Martin, just to be clear, it wasn't about the self-evaluation, it was more about, the way I think he had watched the meeting on YouTube, and I think he was concerned that the county administrator would have a, input in the rating committee, and that there should be, a clear division between, developing and, rating yourself versus just getting the input, in that formal work plan. So I think I just told him I would try to get some clarification on this issue. He did quote the Section 8 of the ethics law, and I completely hear what you're saying. I appreciate it, and I'm going to respond to him accordingly.
So is the direction that you're heading in with these evaluations is that the department head would also do a self-evaluation as part of the review process? Is that what I'm hearing?
That was the direction we were heading in, yeah.
Okay. All right. I got to tell you, as an associate with the Bartlett firm for all those, well, it wasn't that many years. I was principal for a long time. But I always thought that having the individual rate themselves, evaluate themselves and say, I do this well, or I do this better, or I feel I've met this objective, I haven't met this objective, this is what I'd like to do in 2015, this is what I want to do by 2018, I want to be here or there. I think that's a wonderful tool to assist any employer with an evaluation of that employee.
Jim?
I believe it's common practice in many firms, or not law firms, but many companies for self-evaluation to be a part of the thing. So I don't think we're straying from what's normal.
It's very common practice.
Yeah.
So it's just,
Yeah, even in the military, I know that when they do an evaluation, they've asked the individual to evaluate themselves.
It's actually one of the fundamentals of participatory management, and involving someone in a process eliminates the resistance that they might have to the process if they were not included.
Perhaps I could just clear this up. He just said, he wasn't sure if Section 8 prohibits the county administrator from participating in negotiating the terms of his own one-on-one deal for performance pay because it's strictly for his position, not countywide. And I think it was because we kind of veered off the topic last committee talking about tying in performance ratings with raises, and that's where that concern is.
Short answer is, I don't think that Section 8 precludes the county administrator from participating in this process to the extent I understand he has been participating.
Okay, we all set with that now? Move on?
Can I be excused?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, I suggest, since we have this memo from Gretchen, that we ask Gretchen to address her comments to us. I have to tell you, there's only one thing that I'm concerned about, or that all of us should be concerned about, and that's coming out of this with the best product we can possibly get. So with HR bringing up an issue, I think that it's good that we listen and either ignore or change it. But I don't think we can ignore what our HR department is telling us.
I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. I just, from in evaluating an executive, last time when I did that short presentation on talking about the strategic planning process, there's a process that we go through to evaluate what we're trying to accomplish in the organization. The county administrator here at Warren County, I look at that person as the chief executive. You know, there is a board of directors that is providing direction. There's 20 people that are on the board of directors. But for day-to-day operations, the county administrator is the person with feet on the ground making things happen every day. When I made the recommendations about the competencies that we value in our organization, I think that anybody who's in that chief executive position needs to be evaluated on some very high-level competencies. The current draft form has 5 performance elements, and I think that, you know, there is some deviation from the titles to the descriptions, and I think that can be confusing. It also, to me, doesn't really provide the depth that I would be looking for in a CEO evaluation. CEO would be held to a very high standard. The county administrator, same thing. You also have received a copy of the county administrator's draft goals, and I think there are a dozen of them, and you can see the complexity of those goals. I tried to put them in categories, and I did get them down into 7 categories, but there's a lot of cross-information in there. I'm also looking at this evaluation. This has to be the beginning, I believe, of a system. And if you're going to put a performance evaluation in place for the county administrator, and then your next step is looking at the department head evaluations, there needs to be some consistency in form. We just had the discussion about the self-evaluation, which is very common in most organizations. And one of the statements I made last time in my presentation is, no one does a better job of evaluating your performance than you do. You're the one. If there's something in it for you, what you're doing is you're keeping contemporaneous documentation over the course of the work cycle to make sure that when you're evaluated at the end of the cycle, you can speak to those performance expectations that were set forth at the beginning of the performance period. So, you know, I think that the self-evaluation is a critical part of this process. One of my other recommendations about the executive committee and the comment that I made about a note, it's a footnote at the bottom of the evaluation about having all 20 of the Board of Supervisors have what I'll call an equal weight, an equal vote in evaluating the administrator's performance. I'm just not sure that that's a really the best idea for our environment. And I'm also looking at this evaluation. We have a current administrator in place, but we have to also look at succession. And so we're going to be looking at what we're going to be evaluating now, but we're also what we're evaluating in the future. And I think that looking at competencies, for example, you know, leadership, financial acumen, change orientation, communication, compliance, those kinds of things, I think that those are the things, the key elements that we should be evaluating an administrator on. And those are the expectations reasonably. If we were going to recruit somebody into the organization, we would be reasonably looking for these kinds of attributes in a candidate, you know, for this particular position. I don't know if anybody, you've all read the memo now. I'm not sure if you have any questions for me.
You've got 18 elements on there. That seems like a lot.
It is. There is some crossover. They might be able to be combined, but it would just depend on the descriptions.
Jim?
I have a question. Did you say you didn't think that all 20 supervisors should be part of the evaluation? Is that what you
Maybe
said?
I didn't express that properly. I think that in the last presentation that I did, there were several documents that I had reviewed, and one of them was an evaluation that I thought that would be appropriate for all 20 supervisors to fill out. But what I mean is that each vote should not be weighted in such a way that the average of all 20 will be what the administrator's rating will be. I think that decision should be up to the executive committee, because as I mentioned in my memo, is that the executive committee is oftentimes the folks that understand what the administrator is doing on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So there may be somebody on the Board of Supervisors, or a few folks on the Board of Supervisors, who only have very limited input to the county administrator. And so if they have limited input, then if their evaluation is weighted the same way as somebody who has a great deal of interaction with the county administrator, and their evaluations are very different, then I think that there needs to be somebody who makes the ultimate decision, and I think that the team of folks that are on the executive committee are the right people to make that decision.
I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I also think that all of us are accountable to the voters. And as such, the administrator may not be a perfect system, but that it has to be weighed. I mean, it could be both. It could be one where all the supervisors, vote, one way, and then have the executive committee, and if they come out two different ways, then maybe, but I think both have to be there because that's a reality whether we want to accept it.
Oh, absolutely. Just like in the participatory management, when I talked about the self-evaluation being critical, the Board of Supervisors, I understand that. That's our system of government. And so everybody has to have a voice. But ultimately, the evaluation should be written by the executive committee. That is usually how it's handled in most corporations.
But corporations are different than this.
One thing that you said, Jim, is each supervisor would have a vote. I don't think we should put our evaluation process or review process up to a vote, but if you looked at this thing that I handed out just a little while ago, what I was suggesting is that each supervisor do a review of the administrator, and then that be used as a document for the executive committee to use to make up a final review.
I see that as a way of creating tension rather than, I think we're the ones that are responsible, and that it comes down to us. It's a very imperfect system, but I think if you're going to do it, you have the executive group do one evaluation, and then the supervisors do another. And if they're two different things, well, that's just the way it is. But I don't think it's healthy to just have the executive committee do it.
I think maybe some of us are at a disadvantage. Could I just explain the rationale behind the form? Because I don't think it's been fully explained. When we came up with the elements at the last committee meeting, it then became how do we put them into a form, just a rating form. And I met with Gretchen and spoke with her, and she had used a rating form internally for her department. And so that was the draft form that we were all presented with the last time. So I had used that template and did the same successful meets, exceeds, or does not meet standards. And in looking at some other counties and talking with NISAC and looking at agencies such as Soil and Water and Community Action and some other supervisors, they had suggested that perhaps there's a way that each supervisor, because the position of county administrator is different than any other position in the county, he reports to 20 people, because I wasn't aware we had an executive committee that's established or I know we had talked about who would actually do the rating, but hadn't decided upon that there would be a way that each supervisor would have some input. And so this, to me, and not just me, but to some other people, seemed as though it was kind of a concrete method that was not as subjective, so that we could say, all right, well, we have a confidential way to talk to our executive committee or whoever does that rating. I know initially it was even fooled around with the idea of this committee doing it, but whoever does it has some confidential input from the other supervisors. But then also this more public document that Paul would see, that is the rating form. And so we all have valuable feedback, even if we don't interact with Paul as much as the chairman or the budget officer. We all have our goals that we report to our constituents and what we hear from our members. So this way, everybody kind of had a say in how they felt things were going, but it was consistent because it was the same form. And then to come up with that average rating, and I know Bud said he had some concerns with this, and it's just an idea, is that you take the 20 ratings and you add them up, and for this element, 12 people said exceeds, 4 people said needs, 2 people said didn't. And then you take those averages and you present them to your committee that's doing the evaluation. And then it's, I think we've been criticized a little bit for and I know we talked about this at the last meeting with Frank, people come up to the board, to the budget team, and they say, well, this person needs a raise, they've been here 20 years, they work really hard, they haven't gotten anything, but we don't have the backup to all their great accomplishments that they've done the whole time. So it wasn't a group of 3 or a group of 5, deciding on somebody's raise. It was more collective with this information, and so you could easily substantiate, okay, Paul had a meets to exceed rating, or the county administrator, because this isn't about Paul, this is about the position. And how do you come up with that? Well, you had 20 people do an evaluation, and these are your cumulative numbers. And then the examples that you all saw on those forms, there's a lot of room for that committee who's doing the rating to decide, well, what substantiates that rating enough? Well, could it be when he did this, and then there's an explanation of that, or could it be when he did that, and there's that explanation? But it seemed like a fair way when you have 20 people for everybody to have a voice and a vote. So that's the background to it.
Well, I agree with that, and as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking that if you have a committee in the evaluation, they're gonna know the facts or whatever, but you don't want the supervisors, we're in democracy, we're not in a hierarchical thing. The supervisors need to be educated so that they can make an informed decision. And it's just the way it's part of our philosophy. It's not just a matter, it's unfair to have a small group making decisions rather than the whole board. It sort of flips it on its head. If you're going to have the whole board do the evaluation, then somebody better make sure they're educated and informed and know what they're talking about. Otherwise, the thing's going to be poorly screwed up. Now, that doesn't mean that a small group can't deal with them a lot, can't also make their own evaluation and then see if the two compare. And if they don't compare, then you got to meet, and one side's got to educate the other as to why they came up with what they did, and then eventually develop a consensus. If we're all reasonable people, I think we can do that. But I don't think, philosophically, I'm against having a small group make a decision.
Ultimately, the full Board of Supervisors would have input on this. The Exhibit A was the exhibit from last week, where all the supervisors would have the ability to rate the county supervisor within the categories. The difficulty, the scenario that you lay out, Supervisor Brock, is that unless the entire board, all 20, for example, were keeping contemporaneous documentation of the administrator's performance over a period of time, then they would likely be remembering the big things, the bad things, and the recent things. And so they would be evaluating that individual's performance on what they remembered versus on what's been documented. And so that's why in my memorandum, my recommendation is that the executive committee would write the evaluation. I think that everybody has to have a voice. But I also want, from a performance management point of view and from a human resource point of view, I think that the evaluation process should be a fair process. And so we also have to look at this from the administrator's point of view.
I think what the things you're talking about, no one would ever run a corporation with 20 people at the helm. And that's a fact that we deal with. And we're accountable to the people. So the information that goes into the evaluation has to be, the supervisors have to be educated, and if they're not educated, then somebody from both parties has to make the effort to educate themselves, because that's the way it is on everything. We make judgments on everything that goes on around here, and that's a fact of life, and to sort of, because we say it's unfair, well, that's just not, that the reality is we have a democracy, and it has to fit into democracy, and it's not an easy thing. It may not be entirely fair, but that's the way it is.
I think that one of the things you said, Jim, in business, you have a board. And a board of directors doesn't participate in doing review of an individual. They have to have someone that has a responsibility for doing that. I think it would be extremely cumbersome if you had to have 20 reviews turned in and have them on a timely basis and get away from some of the individual feelings. I don't care how good an administrator is. He's gonna have some people on the board that are gonna not think very much of him, and if they do a review, it'll come out skewed. So, my other thing, go ahead.
Well, but, you know, businesses are businesses, government is government, the two are totally different animals, and to compare us to a board of directors is just wrong. I mean, a business is about execution. We have the power of taxing, and we have the power to make laws. That's a whole different thing than running a business. Business is about flexibility, it's about people all have basically the same agenda, or should. Here, it's a different thing altogether. And when people try to make government execute and have teamwork and all that like a business, they're missing the point. It's supposed to run, I think it was Tip O'Neill said, government runs best when it runs slow. We have to go slow, we have to understand, we have to be very conservative about what our goals are, and it can't be run like a business as much as we may want. And it's like I said, it's just not the same thing. And make it fair, you have to go through this very cumbersome, drawn-out process, but that's the reality of it. And if it doesn't, then you have supervisors who represent voters who are left out of the process. They need to be educated, and their voice needs to be as strong as everybody else's.
We got some people, we got 3 people here that want to be heard now, and I'd like to go to them. The other thing I would caution is that we're spending a lot of time now talking about the end result and who does the final review. I think one of the first things we got to remember is that we want to create the form and create the way to review it. Gene?
Well, I've been most of these meetings, except the first one, and, you know, this is almost an impossible task. To a point, I look at it, right, you take Fred Monroe, and he's probably the eldest person here, his years on this board, and there's a lot of us that got, you know, yourself. So, you know, to review, let's just say, and I might be embarrassing myself or Mr. Sousa, but if you had to have 20 people vote on his raise next year, well, you have people that know him all the time that he's been here, and there's people that just come in, you know, that don't really know, and let's say he just screws up something this year, and some people see that, I'm not saying he will, but, you know, over 10 years, you do 9 things really good, everybody, but sometimes you don't want to vote by somebody come in and say, well, you know, he didn't do this job good enough, and I'm going to vote against him. So, I mean, it's really a tough thing what I think we're all trying to put together, in my mind, as far as getting, you know, and I understand what you're saying, one vote, because that always bothers me here. My little vote from Lake Luzerne, you know, fly shit compared to, you know, some of the people that represent more people. So weighted votes sometimes, like my tax thing, if we went to vote for 20 people, I'm pretty sure I could pass that tax thing. But when the ones that vote against it with their very weighted vote, we'd lose. And I've seen votes lose with 11 people vote yes and 9 people vote no. We've lost. And I've had that come out in the paper, and people ask me, what kind of system you have up there? And I have to explain to them it's weighted by population. So, but so the weighted vote sometimes is not always the best way to do it. That's my 2 cents.
Okay, thanks. Matt?
I agree with having, you know, the 20 supervisors, you know, do the form and then the executive. I mean, these are people that are working on a daily basis that really are, you intimate with the operations of the county a little more than somebody that's not, like a head of the budget or, chairman of the budget. So I think it's kind of an oversight that would protect from, being left in forms, forms being filled out based on a one issue problem. So I think it would be good if we were gonna do this, to have that.
Okay, Fred?
I'm comfortable with the executive committee doing it based on input from all the supervisors. And I don't think the average is the right way to do it, because I think it could be skewed by just one or two supervisors, for something they're not pleased with, vote the rate extremely low. I mean, another alternative, and I don't necessarily advocate for that, would be to have the executive committee do the rating and then have an executive session to have the full board, have input into it if there's any change, but not actually vote, because you can't vote in an executive session.
Okay. Jeff? Dan?
I think that the forum should be done by all 20 supervisors, but, we have personnel, and I don't know why it wouldn't go to personnel. The chairman appoints the personnel each year, committee, and we generally involve ourselves in a lot of, operational and issues that involve HR, et cetera. So they have experience, and I don't know why it would go to executive. I'm missing the executive compared to personnel, and I think you'll get some pushback from personnel as to why they wouldn't be involved in these, not just Paul's, but his position, but as we go down the ladder and try to make this a functional item of what we haven't had.
Ron?
I tend to agree a lot with Jim, and I'm kind of, I don't know what the best word to use is. I don't want to start anything here, but I do not think that this board is made up of people who are willing to put down a performance review shallow stuff about the person they're reviewing. I think we all have relationships with the employees at the county, including Paul, and that we can draw professional opinions from that, not based on our personal opinions or what was most recent in our mind or whatever, but on a broader perspective. The second thing I wanted to ask is, as far as our agenda, what we're doing here today. Are we trying to establish who's going to do the performance review, or are we trying to put the thing together?
We're trying to put the form together.
Well, I guess we haven't gotten to that part yet, but...
But if there's discussion, we don't want to cut it off either.
No, I know that. I realize that, but I'm just wondering what we're going to walk out of here today with, because there were 3 previous meetings I attended to, and I missed the last one, work done on developing this that Rachel's put together, and then we get this memo that basically tosses this out the window and says start over. And I don't know what the rest of the committee wants to do with this. I don't know, we say the last few meetings and period of time that we spent on this, especially Rachel and Bud, was just practice or what? I mean, this is a rather extensive list of we'd have a huge stack of paper you'd have to put together, and I don't know if we'd ever get through it, and I think you'd have less of a likelihood of good input the longer that list gets. And I'm really kind of confused about the last paragraph of your memo, Gretchen, election cycles. Are you thinking that the executive committee is immune from the election cycle, or what is your
No, what I mean there is that the manner in which the county operates, we've got the chairman of the board of supervisors, there's a vice chair, then there's the budget officer, and then, as Chairman Garrity had talked about, the finance committee chair and the personnel committee chair are often involved in some of the bigger decisions. When I talked about the election cycles every 2 years we have the potential to turn over the board. And so there is an orientation period. Just like I've been with the county 1 year, I'm smarter today than I was a year ago. But a new supervisor coming in who's newly elected has a great deal of orienting to do on systems, processes, the way the county government works, getting up to speed on operations. Even if they're on select committees, they would probably be more well-versed in those committees than they would be in committees that they don't serve on. So there's a tremendous learning curve for somebody who comes in. It is the nature of our operations here.
Okay.
So that's what I was talking about there.
But I still don't get the connection.
The connection
every
is
member
if-
of that executive committee would theoretically be subject to being defeated in an election or choosing not to run again. And then you'd start with a brand new person, perhaps not in that position, but, I don't know. I don't need to get stuck on that and hold this up any more than it's already held up.
Okay, I think, and I'm not trying to build a case. I think the right thing to do is to have a smaller group do the final review. I think the right thing to do is to get the input of every single supervisor by having each supervisor fill out the form. And I also think that the nature of the executive committee members are typically, if you look at our people now that are on those positions, they're people that have years of experience on the board. And it's tough. If you know, I could be gone next year, you could be gone next year. So if we learn how to do if every supervisor learns how to do the rating, where are we next year? We got a new group coming in. You know, we made the decision to go with a strong HR department. And I think that we shouldn't take lightly the fact that HR is telling us to go in one direction and we're thinking of going in another. Jim?
Yeah, one fact of all this is in order for a raise to go through, it has to be voted on by the whole board. So if you're gonna have a raise put into effect, the very issues that you think are unfair are gonna have to be resolved no matter what. So if there's a bunch of people who disagree with the executive committee, they can vote down the raise.
Well, that's true. And maybe
But you would
that
have the
brings us-
performance documentation to talk about. If you wanted to go into executive session, for example, you would have the performance documentation.
You would need to convince them that the document was accurate.
I think Fred mentioned this, if I'm wrong, let me know, but I think Fred made a suggestion that maybe the executive committee could come up with a review and at a personnel meeting or whatever, the group could either thumbs up or thumbs down, vote for whether or not they would approve what the executive committee came out with.
Yeah, it could be a draft evaluation by the executive committee discussed in executive session. I think that'd be a proper topic of executive session. And then in executive session, if there's one or more supervisors that don't agree with the evaluation, they could have to change the committee's mind.
That would make a lot of sense. Rachel?
I think in part the reason that a forum was there is, you know, not all of us can make all the meetings, and then that way people have an opportunity to kind of put their thoughts down on paper or reach out or whatever the case might be for consideration to that group making that evaluation. But I agree with Dan regarding the personnel committee. When this committee, this performance one, was initially established, Kevin Garrity sat there and said that he envisioned the personnel committee perhaps doing the evaluation. I know I heard you say that our executive committee, if established, would be people that have been on the board typically for years. You don't get in those positions without, you know, having some experience. But I think that limits some input from people that are new to the board as well. You know, I think that way you have a well-rounded perspective by people on that personnel committee. Like I know Matt's the only new one on that personnel committee this term, but brings in a little bit different of a perspective, and you get people from different, you know, the executive committee right now is all made up of, you know, the towns up north as well. you know, it would be nice to have more of a well-rounded, evaluation team with that personnel committee. But I know our job here is to come up with a form, which brings me back to when you asked me to do this the last time. I was very clear in the fact that I would do what I was asked by the chairman, both by you and Kevin Garrity, but I didn't want to go through the motions to once again sit here and have it thrown out. Now, if we choose to throw it out, so be it. I mean, that's part of learning, and I'm okay with that. But I'm a little concerned that as a committee, this wasn't just last meeting, it was the two before that we did the research, we all came together, we solicited input, and we said we wanted this to be simple, not to overthink it, to have a few elements, to be able as supervisors to, I get what Gretchen's saying, in her opinion, they're largely unmeasurable, but if you ask any of us for those 5 elements that as a committee we decided on, all of us would be able to come up with examples of ways to measure the county administrator's performance on those. So I just distinctly remember us, and in those minutes, saying we wanted a simple, broad document that was easily understandable and solicited the input from all supervisors. So I don't know. I guess
I think we've got to be open to coming up with the best result. I said that before. And the fact that you were good enough to take the time and to create a form that you would suggest to us, that's fine. But I don't think it's fair to say, hey, you know, if we don't use that, then I don't...
I'm not saying it's my way or the highway, Bud. What I'm saying is the last time I sat here and said I do it, but I didn't want to be in the same spot I was with the elements, that we were going to start all over. And if that was the case, maybe, you know, then we shouldn't do it that way. And everyone agreed, no, take a shot at the form. And I used a form that's already being used by our HR department. So the issue, again, isn't the form, it's we're back to the elements.
The elements.
That the committee decided upon last meeting, 2 meetings ago.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I've been part of, you know, obviously the discussions that have occurred during the past couple of meetings, and, you know, it was my impression that that it wasn't really well settled on the particular elements, and in fact, if you'll recall, what happened was at the last meeting when I attempted to work with our HR director and bring back a form or forms that we thought met what your elements were, Supervisor Sieber felt that they were not. So I think that what it is that this is a tough process. It's certainly more involved than you know, it might appear on its face. And I think that everybody's trying to do a good job here. Everybody's trying to get to the right place. I certainly support evaluations, not only of myself, but all departments and staff. I think we're on the right path here. We should be doing this as a county. It's been something that's been long on my wish list. But I also think that, and I'm not looking at it from necessarily just my perspective. I'm looking at it, who's going to be sitting in my shoes, you know, in the future. And I think when I look at it, and I look at the form that was generated and presented to you today, I just don't feel personally that that is an accurate or provides a good assessment for the county administrator. I also think that you know, we have an HR director who has considerable outside experience, consulted for a long time, has worked with a lot of different organizations, certainly has more knowledge than I do on these areas, and she's recommending a you know, a different form. You know, I would just ask you to consider that, because from my perspective as somebody who's going to be evaluated, I would hope that we have a good form, one that I have confidence in. And like I say, I'm not only looking for myself, I'm looking for, in fact, even more than just myself, I'm looking for your next county administrator, because you know, whoever comes into the county to be your county administrator, they have to have confidence and a comfort level that they're going to be fairly evaluated on their work and that they're going to be given an opportunity to succeed. And they look at all aspects of this when they come in to take a job as to how this is all going to work through. And I just think that this is a very, very critical, important process for you, because this position is obviously the top of the ladder of your corporation or your organization. So I think it's well worth the time to put into it to get it right. I would certainly. I think everybody's been working on it. Everybody's been trying. But here again, I think you have an HR director. Why not use that resource to help you get through this process?
Dan, did you have a question or comment?
I'm just trying to, rehash what we've done too. There was, the Genesee County paperwork we had in front of us was provided by who?
That was what, at the session that I had gone over with Gretchen, and that was presented to you at the last session, and...
We had that, and then Rachel
Right.
had some issues with, we had discussed as a group that we wanted some other components inclusive, and then we kind of commingled and said, can we get these submitted into that so we get a hybrid, I guess, and we could move forward? Which I thought it was relatively simple, but now we have these 18 other components. So it just feels like we're going backwards and we're getting more detailed. Is that the understanding?
One of the things that a performance evaluation is supposed to do for an employee is to provide them with performance expectations, so that at the beginning of a performance period, you are setting expectations, how you want that person to behave, the kinds of behaviors that you want them to engage in on a daily, weekly basis.
And before we get to there, did that Genesee County one do that? Because I thought that was a little more simplistic than what we were trying to initiate. So in other words, if we're backing up and we're making an argument for these 18, why wasn't the submission of the Genesee County thing, which I thought was overly simplistic?
Actually,
why wasn't that more detailed last meeting so that we'd be moving ahead faster?
Actually, there was quite a bit of detail in the Genesee County Legislature. It was called the County Performance Evaluation Form, and it was what we had recommended that the supervisors form. There were 13 elements that were evaluated there, and it evaluated the elements differently, but it mirrored the performance goals that the county administrator had provided for you initially in your earlier meetings. I wasn't part of those, but it was initially reflected in those goals.
Yeah, I used to work in business many years ago. What we looked at was, you looked at, everything was measurable, and the top person was based on the measurements of everything below them. So that, like leadership, what is that? Just one person, you're leading us in the wrong way, or you're not leading us at all. Another person, you're doing exactly what we want. And what you look at is the things below them. If everything is humming and everything is at a high mark that's measurable, then you begin to say, well, he's doing a good job because, he's done social services, based on measurement. Social services doing well, DPWs, that sort of thing. So by looking at it, starting with the top and working your way down, you really don't have the measurement thing set up below tall. So it's kind of like, how many widgets did he make? He doesn't make widgets. He makes other people make widgets. So I think it's kind of skewed in a way that's hard to sort of spinning your wheels because you're not really looking at what he's supposed to do, which is to get other people to do things. You agree with Paul?
Yeah, I absolutely, and that was one of the things that we had talked about at the last meeting too, if you recall, is that we're kind of, and I think maybe that's why you're having so much difficulty, is that we're kind of like trying to just partially create a process based on something that needs all kinds of other things to go on. Typically, when you do these types of things, you have a strategic plan in place that's been agreed upon by the board. All the evaluations are in place up and down the line, and then you have this layout of exactly what Supervisor Brock was indicating as to whose responsibilities are what for each of the elements, so that ultimately the county administrator can be held accountable for what these people are doing under them. And as you point out, that's where the real measurement occurs, because it is hard to measure a concept called leadership, but you can see evidence of it in the organization if you have a way of reading that evidence, of having it presented to you. And I think that's part of why we're having in such a difficult position here, because we're tackling one small piece of it when we don't have the rest of the organization set up, and it makes it hard. And we, certainly my position is that this was the direction that the chairman of the board wanted to go in, so I wanted to do everything I could to help in this process. But as you point out, Supervisor Brock, we're in a very, very difficult, and I think that's why we're struggling as much as we are.
Yeah, and I think that I'll be right with you, okay? To simplify this, if it's possible, the form, we're not arguing about the form. All we're talking about is the elements. Am I right?
The content part.
So we're halfway there, guys.
That's where I'm losing it here. Do we need to tweak that more? Is that where?
I think so.
But the issue is, and I've read back through the minutes, I've watched the YouTube video, so I'm only, like, I feel like I'm kind of the secretary here in this spot, which is a very uncomfortable position. I'm only doing what you guys asked me to do, which was, at the last meeting, 2 meetings ago, it was, we don't want 15, 20 elements. Chairman Garrity, we all sat here and said, just do 5 or 6, make it brief, keep it simple, let's not get so complicated. We looked at 6 or 7 different examples, which was what you guys asked me to do some research, bring back different examples. We contacted NISAC. We came back to the table, they said, make it simple, make it brief. Will you do, put all that together and come up with those elements? So we did that. And so when I brought it back this time, now we're back to saying, well, 5 or 6, what I'm hearing is some of us saying 5 or 6 we wanted it simple, and yet now we're looking at 12 on a Genesee County form, which do encompass some of those 5. I understand what you're saying, Paul. Or 18 that are being suggested here. And I only came up with the titles from when Gretchen was speaking at our last meeting. She said she kind of saw this one in leadership, kind of saw that one in communication, and I took notes on that and just put them into those categories. So I feel like what I tried to do was kind of transcribe and take the direction from what the committee wanted. But I guess the question is, do we want it simple, do we want it brief, or do we want it 12 or 18 elements? And the chairman was very clear in the fact he wanted it brief.
And I think it should be as brief as possible, but also it's quality.
Sure.
Paul.
Mr. Chairman, and Supervisor Seaver, with all due respect, I think that my recollection of the last meeting is a little different than yours. My recollection is that we presented some forms that would work, and that you objected to those because you felt that they did not follow your desired format, and you asked the committee if you could go back and rewrite it and come up with something, and I think the committee agreed to that. I did not get the impression that the committee was necessarily against the forms that we had presented. I don't think they were really thoroughly considered because you had objections to them. But my thought is that, and then I'm very concerned if you feel like a secretary, because as a supervisor you really shouldn't, and that's why I think that it's important to delegate these types of jobs to staff so that you don't feel that way. I think that it's up to our HR department to do and redo a form until the supervisors are satisfied. I don't think you should have to undertake that.
Well, I think if we go back and watch that video or look at the minutes, I recall hesitantly saying, listen, I've got a lot on my plate, I'm happy to take a hit at this, but we also have an HR department. When we had sent on that email, it was just looking to take those elements and put them in a Warren County form. My issue with the forms that were presented is that it was a Genesee County form and not something that combined everything we had talked about into a draft Warren County form. So, yeah, I don't know what else to do other than watch the video and read the minutes, and that's how I accepted. I said I would do it hesitantly when we had that discussion the last meeting. So, do whatever you want with the form. But I did what the committee asked me to do.
Okay, you have anything further?
Yeah, I think at this point, to move this along, that maybe what we should do is just ask Gretchen and the HR department to put together a form that she thinks we should use based on how CEOs are normally evaluated. My position on who should do it, I think the executive committee makes a tremendous amount of sense because they are the people that work with the county administrator every day and also on the big issues, and I have no problem with having input from all the supervisors, but I think the executive committee should do it, possibly with just a review in an executive session.
Okay, could I ask for a show of hands, how many people agree that we should go that direction? Okay, that's what we'll plan on doing then. Jim, you have a...
Yeah, I don't disagree with like what Fred's saying or what Gretchen's saying, but the thing about measurement is that one of the reasons you use measurement is because it's objective, and it's really hard to disagree with it. And it's also easy to develop a consensus on it. So I think, I think you should have an executive committee looking at the nuances and all that of leadership. But I think if you establish how, using measurement of how things are run in departments, most reasonable supervisors will say, yeah, he's meeting his objectives, or he's done better than we expected. And I think it's too paternalistic to go with just the executive committee. I think it's, I have to go back to the people and explain why I'm doing this, and I have to agree with it, and I have to vote on the raise. So I think it's being unrealistic to have this small group doing it. And I understand, in a business, you do want, you're not accountable to the workers so much as you are to your stockholders. In this case, the stockholders are the same people that put us in office. So I think it's, the supervisors need to have the power in order to get the information. It's the reverse. It's not like, if I had the information, I'll vote. It's in order for me to make an objective thing, somebody better persuade me, just like on everything else. I'm fundamentally in disagreement with just having a small group.
Okay, any other comments? I think probably at the hour of 12, almost 15 now, I think that we'll ask Gretchen to come up with a form again, taking into consideration the elements that she has presented so far. I think a lot of them, though, there's some duplication there. I think maybe we could cut it back a little bit and have that ready for our next meeting.
Later there.
Is that doable? Okay. Any other business?
I'm just wondering, whose request Gretchen's memo was put together?
Gretchen did that.
Were you requested to prepare a memo?
No, I was asked to review the document, and so I put the memo together based on my professional opinions. No one asked me to do that.
It might look a little strange because some of the stuff that she said is what I handed out to you to have the executive committee. That's pretty much of a coincidence, I think.
And one of the motivations for writing the memo is that I do have a higher level of experience in this area, and so there's a lot of education that goes into that would need to go into getting folks up to speed on a performance evaluation process. The document is just one thing. It's really part of a much bigger picture. So I was feeling like I needed to weigh in on some of the things that were happening in the document. It's not as much about the document as it is about the process. The goal here is to set performance expectations so that you can measure someone's performance. It's giving them direction, it's giving them feedback, and then ultimately in our situation is basing their performance based on their performance expectations. So it really just comes back to, what do you want the person to do, and is it a fair system where they will be measured and that they can depend on it?
Okay, motion to adjourn?
Well, when can we meet again? When is this gonna get done?
How long do you think it'll take you to get this together?
How long, you have to give me a deadline. I just have to meet it. I move things around, that's all.
It happens all the time with me. With other people that I talk to. No, I tell other people,
I'm not going to be here for finance or personnel.
When?
17.
I agree. They're all looking at
February 20th?
February 20th is a board meeting.
before that, or?
Yeah,
We didn't adjourn yet, did we?
We didn't adjourn yet, no.
Oh, yeah.
Why don't we plan on, Tuesday, the 17th, at, 9:30?
Tuesday, February 17th, 9:30.
February 17th, 9:30.
But would it be possible to be able to get whatever the proposed, elements and form are, you know, by the Friday before the meeting?
They will be, I'll have them to, Joan Sadie by Friday, so she can email them out the Friday before.
Friday before the meeting.
So we have the weekend to review it.
Yep.
And this will be like a specific draft Warren County form, not a form from another county, correct?
Should be a draft Warren County form, yes.
Correct, this will be a Warren County form.
Okay, anything else? Ron?
I don't know, I feel like we've kind of wasted our effort here the last couple of months. If it was gonna originate, this process, gonna end up originating in the HR office, maybe that's the way we should have started it. Maybe we learn from this and move on. But it just seems like there was a lot of thought, discussion, and work that went into us getting to the point we were today, and then we're just gonna essentially start over.
I don't think it's a wasted time. I think, you know, we're expressing our own opinions and we're trying to come to an agreement. You know, if we end up going in a different direction than we originally thought we were going to go, so what? I mean, as I said before, it's the end result is what's important. Anything else? Motion adjourned. Dan, seconded by Fred. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.